Yep, that's true. Could have ace high hearts. Rye guy goes all in.
Yeah, like 13Ks.
Something like that. I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I think Ryan's gonna call. And here we go.
What is up, guys? My name is Ryan, and before we get this crazy, maybe the craziest 25, 50, 100 session that you have ever seen, I'd like to give you a little background as to who I am. I'm a professional real estate agent and sports commentator in my home of Toronto, Canada. I've worked with 5 different sports alongside 10 different teams. Simply put, if there's an American-based sport out there, I've probably covered it in the booth. With that being said, a few months ago, I did the unthinkable when I left my friends, my family, and my job at home, traveled 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles, whichever unit of measurement you'd like to use, to Los Angeles, California. What I believe to be the mecca of these high-stakes poker games where the lights are the brightest and the action is the craziest. Now, after a lot of networking, meeting the right people, and finding the right spots, I finally had got given an opportunity to not only play in these games, but also broadcast some of the biggest poker games in the world on Live at the Bike. Now we're talking about guys like Garrett Adelstein, Mariano, Yo Viral, Elke, and Andy, just to name a few of these people that I've either played with or commentated on over the past few months. Throughout this journey, I'd like to break down my thought process and give you an in-depth look as to what I'm thinking throughout each of these moments along the way. There's going to be some highs, there is going to be some lows, but I'm going to be documenting each step along the way and really peeling back the curtain on what it's like to play in these larger-than-life poker games on the biggest stages in the world. Now, throughout this series, I'm going to be very transparent as someone who just started playing poker over 3.5 years ago, and as many of you, I walked into my first game kind of scared out of my mind. I put $50 on the table with $100 in my pocket, with real understanding that all of that money could be gone by the end of the day, but fell in love with the sport and never looked back. So without further ado, let's jump into the biggest game of my life, 25, 50, 100 on Live at the Bike. We're gonna shoot it over to Pastor Ryan to break it down for you. Let's go, Pastor Ryan. Buying into the biggest game of my life, starting with $15,000 in my stack, and in a few short hands, I'll be playing by far the biggest pot of my life with a very similar holding to what we have here. Looking at an open from Peter, and we defend our straddle with Jack 10 and head to a 10 high flop. I check in flow, and Peter fires out about half pot, and I make the call with our top pair. The turn brings in the front door flush, so the board already becoming a little more dicey, and Peter continues to tell his story for $550. With our top pair, it's too strong to fold and a little too weak to raise, so that leaves one option, which is to proceed with just a call yet again. The river is just about as dreadful as it gets, the Queen of Diamonds, and once again I check it over to my opponent, who isn't done telling his story, firing one final $1,500 bet into the middle. We lose to a flush, we lose to any hand like Queen Jack that might have been barreling away with some overs and a gut shot straight draw. We obviously lose to a hand like Jack 9 that would now get there on the river, and maybe some one spade holdings like Ace of Spades Queen, King of Spades Queen. You guys get the idea. Overall, I think this is a pretty trivial fold, but it's early on in the show, which I think will prompt a lot of people to be a little more aggressive with their bluffs. I want to establish a dynamic between someone whom I believe will be extremely aggressive, will give a lot of action, and I would like to battle with throughout the entirety of this matchup. We beat hands like 7-6, 6-5, and some ace-high or king-high type hands that decide to go crazy, but I certainly don't see a ton of hands that we're ahead of. Anyways, with all that being said, I make the call and see my speculation is correct as he shows 6-5 offsuit, and we scoop in the first pot of the day. Sometimes poker is about saying F it to theory and going with your read, and thankfully we did in this situation. Throughout this series, I'll be doing that a bunch. I'm not here to play like a GTO robot, and I'm going to be stepping out of line time and time again, trusting my instincts and going with my gut. Thankfully, in this situation, we were able to step out of line and scoop in a 3K profit early on in the show while sending a massive message to the table that we are not going to be pushed around, and we are here to battle.
Rye guy, kind of curious, makes the call, and he's going to be shown that his 10 is good.
These guys are definitely not here to just sit around and make hands.
3 hands later, we look down at the beautiful ace-jack suited on the button, and it looks like we've got a customer, and this will be a theme throughout the night, as Peter 3-bets us to $900, and ace-jack suited, perfectly fine to see a flop in position, which comes down ace-king 4. So top pair, good kicker, and Peter continues for the same size, 900 with our top pair, backdoor flush draw, in position, nothing to do here but just call. The turn gives us trips, and our opponent unfortunately lets off of the gas, checking it over to us. I play this one sneaky, considering that it'll be tough for us to get called twice by some worse hands, and I want to give him all the rope that I can in order to bluff off with hands, say, like 10 high. The river bricks out, and now we're going to be going for a massive bet when he checks it over to us, hoping to get looked up late by a player who may be steaming after the previous hand, but unfortunately when we fire a pot-sized river bet, he has nothing, and we truck along to the next hand.
Another pot going over to Rye Guy. He's on fire so far in the show.
In this hand, we see an open from Ryan and a 3-bet from PP. Cool name, cool guy, even cooler hand. Before I look down at pocket tens, a semi-premium kind of hand. Up until this point, I didn't see my opponent as the kind of guy who was going to be getting out of line with his 3-bets. Certainly not against a guy who is as dominant in these games as Ryan Malky. As you can see, I was dead wrong about the situation, and this will not be the first time that I'm dead wrong about a situation. But he only has about 7k in his stack after the 3-bet, so I think all options are on the table. I can fold because in my mind at this time, my opponent is going to have a very strong range of hands. We're on stream, so I don't like to be a nit, especially early on in the show, so that's out of the question. I can re-raise, but considering that if we were to re-raise and he shoved over the top, I'd almost certainly be priced into call, considering how little is left behind. So I split the difference and just make the call, which I rarely will do. If we were ahead pre-flop, we should still be ahead on this deuce 6-4 board. My opponent continues for $1,000, and I think you can make a case for raising here, but I just call to see how my opponent wants to play it on the Queen of Diamonds turn, where my opponent improves to a very, very well disguised flush, and even more surprising, he decides to check it over. The price of free sounds pretty good to me, so let's see the river, which is another queen. A pretty great card for me. It's another queen, which makes it less likely for our opponent to have a hand like ace-queen, and it may deter him from bombing the river with hands like aces or kings. He puts in one final bet of about half pot, and considering that we only have to be right here about 1 in every 4 times to break even, you know, if you got it, you got it. Aces, kings, or a queen are plenty good, but to my surprise, he flips over the good old King 7 of diamonds, completely owning my soul and running my brain through a blender. Well played, sir.
Right guy calls, going to be shown the bad news, and what a timing from PP here. Just out of the blue, 3-betting King 7 of diamonds makes the flush.
Dead even after an hour of battling and beginning to feel more comfortable. So I add another $5,000 onto the table for a $20,000 buy-in just moments before the biggest hand of my life takes place. We see an open to $300 before looking down at Jack 10 suited. Since we're in the small blind and going to be playing out of position, I want to take control of this pot, so I 3-bet it up to $1,300. The action gets to Ryan in the straddle, where he decides $1,300 is chump change. He makes it $3,000 to go. The original raiser gets out of the way, and I speculate with, let's call it an ambitious call. A little over $6,000 in the middle, and if we're going to miss, we might as well miss in style. King Queen 4 with a couple of hearts. We have a straight draw, we have a flush draw. It would be way cooler if we could say we had a straight flush draw, but I guess I can't complain when we flop the draw of all draws. I check it over to the initial raiser with our Jack High, who bets $1,500, and my heartbeat begins to elevate as I start to get a better sense of what we're about to do. Obviously, on one hand, it sucks that the board is king high, since he can have all of the best hands here. All the sets like kings and queens, alongside very strong hands like aces and ace king, which probably won't fold. But we have the most beautiful draw that I've ever seen in my entire life. Beyond this, playing out of position to one of the most feared high-stakes players in LA, Ryan Malky, isn't all that enticing to me when I could apply maximum pressure and, as Mike McDermott in Rounders said, put him to a decision for all of his chips. So I do what we should be doing with our best bluffs, especially when playing out of position. I apply maximum pressure and take away his positional advantage, considering that he'd be acting last on the turn and the river. So in order to fold out hands like ace-queen, pocket jacks, and tens, maybe some ace-5 suited, and allow him to make mistakes with hands like aces or ace-king, I go all in for the biggest bluff of my life, $15,000, and I'm immediately relieved to see that he didn't snap call us on our jam. And what that means, he doesn't have a set, and he doesn't have a better flush draw. So we did all that we can in order to maximize in this situation. We took away his positional advantage, we guarantee that we get paid when we hit our worldie of a draw, and we force him into a position where he has to make the difficult decision. So after some moments for deliberation and a time chip being used, he decides to make the call with his top pair top kicker. I would have preferred a fold, so we could have raked in $5,000 uncontested, but that's okay. As you can see here, we're still a favorite and are going to win this hand more than half of the time. I just really hope that this is one of those times. So I ask the poker gods if I can use my one time here. A straight draw, flush draw, all in, running it one time for blood for a pot of over $35,000. Holy shit. I'm hoping that the dealer is going to be my new best friend and deliver us an ace, a 9, or a heart on the turn or the river. And he obliges right away with a heart on the turn, saving us the heartache of having to smash the river. A $36,000 pot, an $18,000 profit heading in our direction. This is by far the biggest pot I've ever won in my life. My heart is racing, the blood is pumping, and I am ready to battle.
What an unbelievable hand. We haven't seen many 4-bet pots on the show, and we get an all-in flush draw versus top pair. Run it once, and Jack 10 gets there right on the turn.
4 hands later, pocket 10s on the straddle, Peter opens, Ludo calls, and we 3-bet our big pair. I mean, if we're going to do it with Jack High, we might as well do it with our big pairs. Peter wants to battle, but Ludo finds his way out. Our opponent looking to put a world of hurt on us and take a dent out of our stack. I'm hoping that the board can remain 9 high so we can retain our overpair, but the dealer disagrees when my new best friend puts out a flop of 4, 6, 10 top set trip 10s in a 3-bet pot against an extremely aggressive opponent just moments after showing down a massive bluff. Alright, okay, time to play it cool. I start out with a small bet trying to keep him around with all sorts of junk, and he tosses in a yellow chip and we head to a turn. The turn is a very interesting card. It's the 7 of spades, bringing in a backdoor flush draw. And since we have all of the 10s accounted for, I mean, almost all of them, I think it's far more likely for our opponent to have a draw, a medium strength hand, or just complete air. And as mentioned earlier, Peter is a very aggressive opponent. And what do aggressive opponents like to do? They like to bluff. A lot. So with that in mind, let's take an unorthodox line, give him some rope. I check it over to our opponent and he's not going to let us down, firing $2,500 into the middle. Considering that I have 2 of the 3 10s that are available, I think the majority of the hands that Peter have when he bets the turn are going to be draws. And there are a plethora of them out there. We're talking spades, clubs for the obvious flush draw, any 9, 8, or a 5 is a straight draw, and those straight draws will likely be accompanied by a pair to go along with them, which is good for a little showdown. He could obviously have a straight, but if he has 8, 9, or one of those other funky straight combos, he just deserves all the money, and we could always boat up on the river if that's the case. So with that in mind, and about 8,000 in the middle, a little more than 10,000 left in our opponent's stack, I decide it's time to leverage our hyper-aggressive image that we've cultivated up until this point and wager it all. A $13,000 all-in, jamming for the second time in the same orbit, pricing out his draws and potentially warranting some light calls from hands like 7-8, 6-5, considering that we're going to have a fair amount of bluffs on this board. And, you know, just a few moments ago, we did the exact same thing with Jack High. So now the chips are in the middle and it's Peter's turn to decide what he wants to do. And all of that theory goes out the window when he folds his hand, which turns out to be just ace high. Obviously, if I could see his exact hand that he was drawing dead on the turn, I would have just called. But considering what he most likely is to have in this situation, I like taking an aggressive approach. I think it's a bit of a disaster if we were to just call and he doesn't follow through on one of those bluffs if the board breaks out. And even worse, if we pay him off when he gets there, considering I'm probably not ever folding top set to this opponent on any river. So even though it's a fairly anticlimactic end to the hand, I'm glad we could eke out a little more value with an unorthodox check on the turn with our top set.
Mixing it up, and he got rewarded for it.
Yep, nice hand there.
The very next shuffle, still stacking the chips, and we see an open from Peter before peeling back king-queen offsuit in the big blind. And I decide to just call here. Maybe I was being lazy, maybe I was being nice and not trying to seem too aggressive after that last hand, or maybe I just wanted to hit top pair and let someone who I perceive to be coming after me blast off. And hit top pair is exactly what we do on this king high board, and it seems like the plan is coming together when the initial raiser puts out a big bet, and I tag along with a call, and John, to my direct left, follows my lead. The turn 4 of clubs brings in the backdoor flush draw. John and I both check it over in flow to Peter, who continues the aggression, firing 70% pot. I make the call, and John gets out of the way, and when the river breaks off, it goes check, check. And it makes me believe that we left some money on the table. There are so many draws that we can maximize against on this turn in this scenario, including the exact hand that Peter had. Queen Jack is a draw, Jack 9, 7-9, club draws that are all picked up on the turn that I think putting in a check raise on that exact card makes the most sense as opposed to calling. If he's got a hand that's beating us like aces, ace-king, pocket 10s, pocket 8s, or some other funky 2-pair combo, he's going to put in a big bet on the river regardless, and we're going to be forced to pay him off anyways. I believe that this is a spot where I blundered a little bit and wasn't able to adjust from the plan that I had set pre-flop, which was setting the trap and calling down and allowing my opponent to blast off. Maybe I'm being a little hypercritical, but looking back at this spot and spots similar to this is a great way to try to get better, regardless of if you're at the local 1-2, 1-3, 5-10, or a friendly 10-cent, 10-cent game with your friends. Analyzing spots like this and finding ways to maximize is a great way to improve instead of just chalking it up as a win, thoughtlessly dragging the pot with a smile on your face, and moving on to the next hand. But nonetheless, I certainly can't complain about scooping a 4K profit in the hand, even though I do believe that there was some money left on the table. The next hand of note, we have King 8 suited in the straddle. Ryan raises it up, and we see a couple calls out of the blind, so we ain't going anywhere with our suited king closing the action. The flop is pretty decent for my hand, king high, and the action quickly checks around. The turn, however, is very interesting. It's the 6 of spades bringing in a flush draw to go along with our half-decent top pair. A familiar foe from the last hand quickly leads out for half pot, and even quicker, the player on my right calls. Now, I feel I've got the best hand, and if we don't, we're still drawing to the flush. On one hand, it would suck if someone re-raised us, but based on how quickly they both put their money in, I think that's fairly unlikely. 9 times out of 10, I'd probably just call here, considering we have decently strong showdown value to go along with our decently strong draw. But considering that any jack is a straight draw and how quickly these two opponents put their money in, I don't feel either of them is very strong. I go with my read and raise my Value Mart top pair to a Dollar Tree size of 2,000, and with inflation being at an all-time high, you'll soon be using these yellow chips at those types of stores. Peter is ahead of the curve and understands where these trends are heading, so he calls, and our friend in the middle doesn't want to believe in these conspiracy theories, so he checks out with his second pair and open-ended straight draw. With how expensive everything has gotten recently, I'm not too interested in putting more money in this pot with just our no-name brand top pair. But why would we need to check it back if we could just promote my new best friend to a future groomsman as we hit the backdoor flush on the river? Time to go for max value. I don't think Peter has much, but we've got to allow him to make those mistakes. Hoping that my initial assessment of the situation is completely wrong, Peter has a monster, and we just hit a miraculous river to steal this pot from him. I jam for his remaining $4,000. He hits the tank and eventually decides that he is sick and tired of these big bets being compared to discount brands, and even more so of this kid pushing him around. Keep in mind that he saw us go all in with our jack high, and he didn't see what we had when we flop trip 10s and check jammed against him on the turn. Alongside this, there are a bunch of hands not included in this video of us going back and forth. He puts on his cape and makes the hero call and sees the bad news, shipping us an extra $4,000 in the process, and just like a young and smiling Usain Bolt, runner, nothing funner. So about halfway through the show, and no, that is not a typo. And no, that's typically not the percentage of hands that I will play. However, I believe giving a lot of action in these high-profile games is a great way to be invited back. Let's put it this way. If you're going to a juicy private game, you're probably not going to get a warm welcome back if you sit around, knit it up, and wait for aces, rocking our over 50% VPIP in style, meaning that we've played more than half of the hands dealt to us. With over $32,000 profit to show for it, 3.5 years ago, I won $100 in my first poker game ever. Today, that's the size of a big blind, and we are rocking on the main stage with 3 hours still to go. So wow, what a crazy start to our first half of our first session ever. If you enjoy the content, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Let me know about a way I played a specific hand, whether you liked it or didn't. The next episode should be out very soon, so stick around. Thank you for joining today, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.